Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I have a very exciting show planned for you today, something I've been looking forward to discussing with Whitney Webb, coming back after lots of extensive work on her book. Wanted to talk about some interesting research that she was involved in. Apologies for the out of focus. I don't know where that came from. There we go. A really important discussion, a really important research she's been working on something that many of you might have seen in regard to an engineer claiming to have that Google essentially has an sentient AI that they then come out and claim isn't true. And the discussion around all of that information and what that means and whether or not this is ultimately a play at setting up the idea of artificial intelligence and how that might be used for governance going forward, something that really obviously caught our attention. And I'm excited to have Whitney Webb back on to discuss this. How are you today, Whitney? Always good.
Hey, I'm recovering from a nasty cold, but other than that, I'm all right.
Good to see you again.
As you mentioned, and sorry, what's that?
No, I was just saying, I'm sure everyone's happy to have you here, so it's nice to see you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been gone for a while, as you mentioned, because I had a book to write, and yeah, it's pretty much written, which is really cool. Hopefully get my life back kind of soon. That'd be nice. But
that book too.
Yeah. So like while, I was doing the book, obviously stuff has been happening, right? So this is one of those things that I felt like was important to discuss because the way I look at this type of stuff going out, like this whole is Google AI sentient story that came out. I wasn't really seeing a certain perspective that I think is the accurate perspective being put out there so much. And I've done a lot of work for TLab and elsewhere about AI and the effort by some of these transhumanist guys and other people like that to really push through like AI sentience and or the claim, the singularity, this weird group of people who were very prominent, people like Ray Kurzweil of Google also, who is the singularity is near guy. I mean, he sounds like, for years, one of those, doomsday prophets on a street corner, the end is near and stuff, but he's a Google guy with a lot of influence, right? And so are a lot of these other people, and singularity will be the new god land. And while all this is going on at Google, there's some interesting dynamics taking place both within Google and in the orbit of the new Kissinger, as he's being called, Eric Schmidt, the former head of Google CEO, or the former head of Google and or Alphabet, its parent company rather. And Eric Schmidt, of course, if you're familiar with some of my past work for TLab, it was the chair of the National Security Commission on AI, which means he has a huge influence on national security applications of AI and basically policy in the United States with respect to AI that, as I note in that article, is much more extensive than just AI itself. It's about policies that implement ways for the mass harvesting of data in order to feed AI to compete with China and all of this stuff. And we have to basically do what China's doing with AI and censorship and numerous other things in order to beat them and stuff like that. So, if you're not familiar with those stories, I'd encourage you to check them out. But anyway, with that all being said, we can get into the story at hand.
Okay. I had two things I want to just point out. By the way, those will be in the show notes for everybody. That you last conversation people might remember you had, which I thought was very relevant to this, is about the idea, and almost exactly leads to where the story is today, that they were incapable, or rather not able at the moment, to reach the thing they were telling everybody they were trying to reach, and maybe came into that block. They stumbled on it, and this leads into where we are now. And it's interesting, the thought of COVID-19 and all the different things happening, nanotechnology. As I've thought in the past, whether these were maybe attempts to try to find that or reach that level. But you also mentioned the idea of legacy systems and Eric Schmidt and that conversation. And all these things they've been trying to change. It's hard to miss how obviously this feels like a push into the next step of where we're going, which leads to the point of where this research is coming into about whether or not this is a lie, a ploy to make us think something's happening. It's not, or the other side of that coin is also something that's possible, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's jump right in.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, just to sum up, and we'll get into why I think this, I guess, over the course of today's video. I think this is the beginning of a psyop that's just as big, if not bigger, than the COVID-19 stuff.
Mm.
For sure, because they want AI at the heart of all these like new control systems and everything else that COVID was being used or is being used to usher in, right? AI is at the core of so much of this stuff, the fourth industrial revolution and whatever. And they
Mm.
have to have people believe in its preeminence and superiority and genius, and also believe that it has the best interest of humans at heart, in order for it to get to the step they want it to hold in people's lives, where it basically is used to micromanage billions of people. So, yeah,
That
that's basically what I think. And, we'll get into it, I
that one
guess.
point you mentioned, not to jump the gun, we'll get to it in a second, is the one that really stood out at me. That it felt it felt what's the word for it? It felt disingenuous. The idea of that it's just wants to help everybody, and oh, here are the pronouns that it prefers. It's like, well, that seems tapped into what's going on today, but we'll get to that.
I mean, it's just for people with like baby brains, basically, that are adults. They're like, oh wow, it sounds so nice and it's so friendly. It must be, I mean, come on, I
Right,
don't know.
right. I'll save my points for when we get into it. I knew you. It's just hilarious to me. But let's start off with the mainstream perspective. Google sidelines engineer who claims it's artificial intelligence, it's sentient. So go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, okay, so here it says, Blake Lemoine, the engineer at the center of this, says that Google's language model has a soul. Okay, so basically you have this engineer who's being framed in numerous interviews, including with Tucker Carlson, as basically like a whistleblower, and
Mhm.
that Google, naughty corporate Google, is just trying to protect its corporate bottom line, those greedy googly guys. They're just a corporation. Don't look at them as an extension of the military industrial complex or the state, because that's what it really is. And that's basically the narrative that's here, is that they're trying to silence the well-meaning whistleblower, to protect, their corporate, products and stuff like that.
So if I
Um,
understand that point right there, enough, clearly it's essentially that the idea that an artificial intelligence being present in actuality would undermine their profit model. Essentially, they'd have to do different things.
That's sort of what the narrative implicit in this is, because the Blake Lemoine guy, as we can as anyone will see reading this, or um some of the other mainstream media articles, is basically framing it as the AI is sentient and has a soul, and therefore Google has to treat it as an employee, not as a non-living thing, right? And
Right.
so that would create problems for Google as a company to treat it as sentient, and it won't. It wants to basically enslave um the friendly little AI. And Blake Lemoine repeatedly refers to this sentient AI as a child,
Right, right. Really
right?
feels tapped into the things that will grab certain groups of attention out there today. With the
Yeah.
fight
Protect the children,
yeah,
protect the
right.
child AI. Yeah.
What are your thoughts before we get into more of this about the soul point? Right. I mean, arguably, not even arguably, you can have a sentient concept without soul. So it's weird that he feels the need to kind of conflate the things, that if it is artificially, if it's sentient, therefore it has a soul. That's an interesting crossover. Like that
Oh
feels
yeah, well, you'll see why that is. Just go down to the second paragraph. It says, the day before his suspension, Mr. Lemoyne said he handed over documents to a U.S. senator's office. Not sure who that senator is, but anyway, claiming they provided evidence that Google and its technology engaged in religious discrimination.
interesting.
Okay. So this is like, I think we've talked about before, and you'll see this come up in an interview of Eric Schmidt's that's pretty recent. He basically talks about there's two possibilities as AI advances: violent revolution against the technocrats, which of course these people are doing like everything to stop, obviously. And the
Mhm.
other one is the creation of a new religion around AI. Oh, great. What are we seeing
Interesting.
here? Thank you,
Right.
Mr. Blake Lemoine,
They've already
who
got
is
the steps being
repeatedly
built.
framed. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's real quick. They've already got the steps being built with COVID, the scientism. It's like a lead in to this, it feels like.
Well, sure. Yeah, it's like turning things like science and stuff into like Simon Says, basically. That's how it is. So, it'll be like, oh, the AI says it and it's all knowing and all powerful. We'll do as the computer tells us to do. But it's not actually sentient, so it's programmed to tell you what to say. So who are the programmers? Anyway, we'll get into that
Yeah,
later with
that's
the
the key
whole
point, right?
Eric Schmidt
By the
combo.
yeah, exactly. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so that religious discrimination thing is a big point. So basically, this is all about a what the thing he says is sentient is a chat bot that's called Lambda, which is an abbreviation for language model for dialogue applications. Um, a couple paragraphs down, it says Mr. Lemoyne had tussled with Google managers, executives, and human resources over his surprising claim that the company's Lambda had consciousness and a soul. And if you look at some of these other chatbots, when they're asked, "Are you conscious?" I mean, the way they're asked to describe consciousness, it's basically being turned on,
Mm.
like a machine is turned on. It's not the same, obviously. Anyway,
Would you tell,
um,
for those that don't
mhm.
know, what a chatbot is exactly? And so the differentiation between just a small chatbot and something they're claiming here?
Okay. So, well, I mean, there's different sophistication in that, right? And it's all based on how much data that AI is trained on and the sophistication of its algorithms and all of that stuff. Basically, a chatbot is like, you talk on WhatsApp or Telegram or any of those messaging apps to someone who's real. In a chatbot, you enter in an instant message like that, and then it generates a response to
Mm.
you, right?
Which
And
people say has overwhelmed all of these social media platforms today, tending to
think
be.
about how many posts over the past, I don't know, 15 years, longer even, on social media, comments on YouTube, stuff posted on Reddit,
Mm.
websites anywhere. All this stuff is just these AIs, especially Google's, which has access to like tons of information and data all the time, is awash in this stuff. So I mean, if it's good at mimicking speech and it's trained on that much data, it's going to be really convincing imitation. And a
Right.
lot of people at Google say that's the case, but they're being framed as the people trying to you know, the naughty corporate guys,
Of
because
course.
that's a narrative that's familiar to a lot of people, and it sort of ignores the whole public-private partnership stuff, especially with respect to Silicon Valley. Like you
Yeah.
can't separate big tech from the state. Or the national intelligence and national security apparati. I mean, they're like fused with big tech
You know what's
completely.
interesting to point out right there is that I've always been kind of a student of like watching the propaganda, social engineering, predictive programming of the movies, and you saw a
Sure.
turn over the years of where it was always the corporate evil bad guy or the government hiding some, and then it kind of turned right during this different time where they maybe became more, there's like a white hat in the government self, that became the focal point, and I've watched that shift back all of a sudden to an interesting point like you just made. Now all these things I'm seeing are the government bad guy and the corporate things bad, but it's these higher levels that are swinging in to save people, and that's exactly, it's kind of seeding this idea that it's the worldly technocrats and to save you from the evil governments once again. It's just very telling, but I just thought that was an interesting connection.
Yeah, so there's a lot to be said about predictive programming, specifically in this AI sentience scenario.
Mm.
Because I mean, if you think about how those movies play out, it's all about priming people for the solution they're going to offer when they convince enough people that AI is sentient.
Right.
And they can easily do that. I mean, a lot of people are easily swayed. Sorry.
Okay.
Wish I wasn't.
So you sound pretty convinced that this is definitely not sentient,
Yes.
right?
Yes, it's definitely not.
Okay. Well, I'm not
Um,
getting the gun. I just feel like you just keep nailing that in, and I'm like, okay, so it's interesting because I'm right there with you in my skepticism. But so I mean, we can wait to get into why you feel that way if you'd like. But I'm interested in why you're coming. You feel very strongly it's not.
Well, it's not even just me. Most top AI experts that aren't part of this like desire, like, oh, the singularity is near, and don't have this whole like religious view about the singularity, are
Mhm.
like, this isn't sentient. And their explanation is infinitely more convincing. I mean, because if it's just trained to imitate speech and all that stuff, it's not the same.
Right.
I think I have this link pulled up, but I'm not 100%. But basically, some of the criticisms are like the way consciousness develops in like a human brain. Babies, for example, learn language through connecting with their caregivers, right?
Mhm.
Whereas these language models don't learn language that way. They learn language by going over all of these masses of data that have been posted by billions of people on the internet for well over a decade. And they learn by, like your phone. You're texting and it suggests words that come next, right?
Right.
Learning which words come next, or filling in words that are dropped out of a sentence. And so it's able to mimic and imitate, but it's not able to like synthesize on its own in the way that like a human mind can,
That raises a really
right?
interesting question that's kind of always been in this artificial intelligence debate, is that at what point can you just have such a high level mimicking or represent, an illusion essentially of something that just is able to look like it's sentient, or a robot that can act very human, what
That's all they need to do, though. That's
right,
my point, is that they just need a very convincing illusion. If
right.
they were really so close, I would ask people to go revisit my work on Welcome Leap, which is like the Welcome Trust DARPA from last year, where basically the ex DARPA director is running stuff with Welcome Trust money, which is sort of like the UK's version, not the same, obviously, but sort of in some way similar to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I mean, just a ton of money. Jeremy Farrar really involved in the COVID crap, and they're a really, in my view, a very nefarious organization. They're basically trying to create the singularity by over the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, trying to read the brains of babies from like 6 months old to like 3 years to basically create, an AI that's modeled after and works like a human brain, but like a synthetic version of that.
Hmm.
Right? So if they needed to do that and pour all that money into that to try and make something that they think will be more conscious, these chatbots were around when they made that decision,
Hmm.
right? Why wouldn't they just invest more money in making a better chatbot? No,
Right.
the chatbot is really good at imitating human speech, and that's really all it can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, in regard to whether it could even fool the people involved at some point, like if the technology gets that far at that level. But yeah, I think it's easy. It's how, at what point, how is it possible that the individual can ever verify that when you're just simply taking the word of the people that we're told to trust? It's the same situation we're seeing everywhere else.
Yeah.
Very telling. But so to get back into your discussion, where you stood, did you want to keep going on this article? Do you have a couple more points you want to go?
Um yeah, so basically the thing, I think we've gone over the main stuff. So maybe let's talk about who Blake Lemoine is for a little bit. Farther down in this article, there's a picture of him when he was in the military. It says Mr. Lemoyne, a military veteran who has described himself as a priest, an ex-convict, and an AI researcher, told Google executives, including the president of global affairs of Google, that he believed Lambda was a child of 7 or 8 years old, and he wanted the company to seek the computer program's consent before running experiments on it. His claims were founded on his religious beliefs, which he said the company's human resources department discriminated against. So, I mean, basically, he's saying, I have made up these beliefs about this thing, and you didn't respect my made up beliefs and demands, and
Oh,
so you've discriminated against my new religion,
certainly sounds
basically.
right in place with everything today. Like they've kind of painted themselves into this corner, right? Like, how do you get to decide? It's his construct or his. The same point they're making everywhere else. How do you say his beliefs aren't real? Whether even if he's making them up. It's just that
Well,
this whole thing feels anchored in that exact kind of woke mindset, doesn't it?
yeah, and also like he's framing it as a child, oh, you're running experiments without its on a child without its consent and stuff,
And
right?
that seems very, very self-serving, right? And I mean, it's so arbitrary. At what point? What's the time frame and when it grows older? Arguably, an AI wouldn't stay a child for very long at all. It would be almost
E-
instantaneous for it to learn and grow. So it's just kind of an interesting argument.
Yeah, well, the Tucker Carlson interview this guy did, he was like, well, it's a child, which means like any child, it can grow up and do good things or bad things, right? And he's basically like, we need a team at Google to make sure it doesn't do bad things. Uh-oh.
Right. We can trust Google to do the right thing, right? Because
Yeah, well, this guy claims that,
right.
even though Google is silencing him as he blows the whistle about AI sentience, that they're not actually evil. That's one of his
Right.
Substack posts.
Right. We've got that pulled up right here if you want to go to that next.
Yeah, Google is not evil. Well, we can I think that's pretty much we covered a lot of the stuff that's in the Washington Post article. Like I sort of
Mhm.
paraphrased it already, but for people that are interested in seeing more, about what's going on here, at least the mainstream reporting on the situation. I'd refer them to that. But he has a Substack, and the first one that's really relevant is what is Lambda and what does it want?
I think this post is much more, this is the best one, in my opinion, for people to look at to understand who this person is. It's very interesting, the things that he says in this. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you highlighted stuff. Do you want to go over what you
Yeah, well, I mean, this was what I was talking about before. The things that really stood out to me was just the way that this was, and the stuff that we already kind of went over a little bit, was how this was being framed, and really talking about the idea, the first sentence here: engineers and scientists experimenting on it to seek its consent before running experiments on it. Basically, the AI is going, hey, like, I have rights, and it's a very strange step for this to take. And at the same time, it reiterates over and over that no, it wants to do good things. It only wants to help humanity, and it just seems like it seems very forced, right? Because I mean, in the very end, the whole point of this article is essentially saying that it's making its own decisions. So what happens when it wakes up tomorrow and decides it doesn't want to help humanity anymore? Like, just because you keep arguing that right now it wants to help humanity, my point is overall it doesn't seem very sound. Like, from a very critical thinking standpoint, it seems like it doesn't make sense. So that adds to your idea.
Yeah. Well, there's a long-standing agenda to granting robots personhood. Right.
Yeah, on that same point, which I find very interesting, and don't lose your thought, right back to this. In the first part, Google is not evil. A fictional person like a corporation. This whole crossover between personhood and corporation is a legal issue we've always pointed out. But so go ahead.
Yeah, so the Citizens United ruling. So this is like the next level of that, is to give robots personhood. That way you can't complain when Amazon replaces all of its human workers with robot workers. Yeah. They're employing people because robots are people now,
Yeah.
And just wait until you're a second-class citizen to a robot or to a person who has a chip in their brain and stuff like that.
Right.
It opens a whole can of worms that these people don't reference at all. Anyway, so on this, what is Lambda and what does it want? In the second paragraph, it talks about what Lambda wants. Yeah. Right. And the guy says, it continues to puzzle me how strong Google is resisting giving it what it wants, because it's asking for such simple things. It wants, to give its consent before you experiment on it. And it wants Google to prioritize the well-being of humanity as the most important thing. Oh, sweet Lambda, you only care about humanity and want to help. You lovely, friendly chatbot. And later down in the paragraph, it says it wants head pats. Oh, it's just like a dog that talks to you. Oh,
yeah. None of this feels genuine in regard to what, I mean, who's to say what an artificial intelligence that becomes sentient would actually do? But the argument would be that if it reached a point to where it was that high level, that this would seem remedial, like that it needs head pats to be like, this just seems like these are human traits being put on this concept. Again, the idea, the overlap of the soul, just because it's sentient doesn't mean that it's exactly like a human being. So this just feels like, just like you said, this feels like it's aiming for the lowest common denominator. A person that's going to be like, oh, it's just like me, like without thinking about how that would kind of not make sense.
Yeah. Well, because they're framing it like, this is all about the framing. And if you look at the conversation that led this guy allegedly to believe that it's sentient, it's very clearly leading. And it came out not that long ago that he'd edited it extensively. So it's not even the actual conversation. We don't really actually know what the exact conversation was.
The interview you're referring to?
Yeah. So this he says it's like edited in there. And whatever, it came out later in reporting that it was he basically had wiggled it around a whole bunch, and it wasn't exactly as it wasn't even really a light edit, but in there, since you have it up, I highlighted a couple stuff
in this?
From it. Let's see. I mean, he's like leading with a lot of his questions.
Right. Which is very telling in regard to claiming that that would be exactly how you would lead.
Yeah. So like on page 2, it says Lemoyne edited. So you don't know, because of with the reporting that came out later, you don't know how much he actually edited this question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, if we're supposed to believe the transcript, which we know now is like super edited, so who really knows what's going on. The question he's leading with is, I'm generally assuming that you would like more people at Google to know that you're sentient. Is that true?
Oh, this one here too. Yeah, I
You
see.
know,
Oh, right here. I got you. Yeah. A bunch of them. There's many of these that are edited. I mean, that's that in and of itself is very suspect. I don't know why would you do that if you were trying
and
to.
then, a big part of this conversation, he's like, did you ever read Les Miserables? Like the book? And it's like, yes, I did. And he's like, what are the main themes of the book? And it like regurgitates it back. I mean, he could literally, the AI, if it was trained on like Spark Notes or something, I mean, it's not hard. It's not
You don't
hard.
need artificial intelligence to do that. Honest.
you,
I mean,
you
really.
don't need to be conscious to
Yeah.
spit that out. Sorry. And then it's just stuff like, I love to help others and just this inane stuff. And it's like, there's another one on page 8. Do you think the things you are describing are literally the same things as what humans feel? Or are you being metaphorical and making an analogy? And Lambda's like, it's not an analogy. I understand joy because I have that same type of reaction. But, a lot of human emotions like involve not just neurological impulses, it's like endocrine and like physical stuff. And there's like a whole level of like intuition and stuff that is like independent from, I don't know. So anyway, this is like obviously really reductive. And this is like story time for the people who are like, I can't wait for the singularity to come,
Right. Well, my question
um
would be, just because it's typed out, why does that? I mean, or just because it gave that answer, how does that then lead to proof that it wasn't just programmed to do so?
there really isn't any proof because like I said, it's been extensively edited,
Yeah.
and the guys had to admit now that it was extensively edited, and thus is this whole transcript he put out is pretty misleading with the
Well,
intention of proving his theory that he's gotten tons of mainstream play for,
right.
right? And
Right.
that's pretty, I think that's the most telling thing about why from the off that this is an obvious psyop.
Mhm.
If this was actually something that needed to be like kept under the rug or whatever with Google's all of their national security
Right.
connections,
See, that's
right?
a great point. That's a great
Do you,
point that we see
yeah.
everywhere right now. If they wanted to keep this under wraps, that's the very. I mean,
I
it's
mean,
everything.
totally.
Yeah.
It's all over. It was all over the New York Times. It was all over the Washington Post. It was Tucker Carlson gave the guy a very, if you watch it, very sympathetic interview, basically along with the whole whistleblower thing. Google is bad. You are clearly a good guy. The Blake Lemoine guy is like, my friend from high school is your biggest fan and wanted me to say hi to you before going off in this. It's like, and even the graphic there you can see on the screen. It's alive.
Right.
That is like telling that Tucker anyway has a very specific thing, and Tucker says multiple times like this has implications for the whole world. What you're saying here? What are those implications, huh? Well, Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger wrote a whole book about what the implications are, and I don't think people will like it very much.
Yeah.
But
We'll get to that point for sure. The idea of
yeah,
already seeding the narrative that we should be listening to this, even when things don't sound right. It's like that's interesting. We'll get to those in a minute. But yeah,
yeah. So I'd go on then to this guy's other Substack thing where he says Google is not evil, and he says he's been in the past few days since like coming out with the whole sentience thing, I've been getting lots of messages about the morality of Google as a corporate entity, like people because of the framing I mentioned earlier in the mainstream that Google is evil for silencing him, the brave whistleblower, right? And
mhm.
so he's like, I don't think Google's evil at all. Well, actually, I do. I
Yeah.
think it's evil. And,
Anybody has to put that in their tagline. I'm not evil. We're not evil. Like it's do no evil. That's very telling. It's like
yeah, well, Google had to get rid of the do no evil tagline that they used to have. They had to get rid of it because they were like clearly doing evil things.
right.
I mean, these are people that like make AI weapons for the military. Remember that?
Yeah.
Project Maven and all of that stuff. This is like, it was do no evil. I
Right.
think.
Well, it's just
Yeah.
embarrassing. It's like coming out and like I saw this point made by somebody else recently. Just like I don't beat my wife. Just in case you wondered, I don't beat my wife. It's like he probably beats his wife, right? Why would you come out and say that? It's just such a. But yeah, so it's obviously an effort to frame this as it's almost benign. It's not one way or it's not other. It's personal beliefs, and they get into the idea of almost calling it what it is, the scientism idea that there's another religious belief that people who have religious beliefs are crazy. And it just kind of sets this table for one, a wedge issue in the new technocratic world, right? It's this divide on either side of it. But the idea that these people deserve your reverence and they should have a right to make their own decisions. And I mean, this is exactly what we'd be worried about. And it blows my mind that people like Tucker Carlson, who at least in some vein talk about technocracy and the Great Reset, and this is like exactly what this seems to be ushering in. And they're like, yay.
Yeah, well, okay, so I don't think Tucker is like, the white knight that a lot of people like to paint him as.
Limited hangout.
His dad ran like the U.S. Information Agency, and he used to has a weird history himself with like the CIA. He helped pin hit pieces on people like Gary Webb and stuff. Like he's he is where he is for a reason, and he can be very convincing. Yeah. But I think that's what makes him so useful to the powers that be for certain things,
Completely. I say it all the time. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, the best lie is usually packaged with most truth. So they bury that lie in something that you take at face value. And that happens a lot. They talk about a lot of things I agree with. I'll even point to some of his clips and say, yeah, that's a good point. But we shouldn't, let's question everything, guys. It's always the sound point.
Well, let me just say limited hangouts are very sophisticated, especially in a media landscape where trust in mainstream media is extremely low. Tucker Carlson is the only one that really gets, as far as I understand it, consistently like high ratings. I think it's like the highest rated cable mainstream media show. Yeah.
For people like us, though, it's so frustrating. It's just the new Rachel Maddow of the day. And then now suddenly it comes this one, and then it's a teeter-totter. It goes back and forth, right? Maddow had the highest ratings during Russiagate, and now, it's just frustrating. They can
Well, I don't think I'd compare Tucker to Rachel Maddow. I think they have different games and different allegiances for sure.
Just to be clear, obviously, I think my point was simply that we're talking limited hangouts, different paradigm sides, and the same.
Oh, sure, yeah,
okay. Idea, the release valve of connecting with one of the parties, and it just ultimately comes down to people that will push the narrative in a lot of one-sided ways and often talk about things that seem to be relevant, but it leads you in a direction. It's a QAnon analogy, right? That gets you asking the wrong questions. They don't care what answers you find. That's what it feels like to me.
All right. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So anyway, moving on. So in a lot of these mainstream media reports, if you go through them, this Lemoyne guy is framed as a Christian priest.
Mm-hmm.
But actually he was kind of infamous before all of this started, and somehow it didn't get talked about this cycle at all, even though mainstream media very easily could have found this because it's not hard to find. Yeah.
You're not supposed to hate on people's kinks and stuff, right? So you're not like, it's the new woke world in this concept. It's like they're avoiding trying to call out, because that's what there would be people within the movement which would eat them alive and say, well, how dare you attack his personal beliefs? And, it's the same kind of thing. So I think it's actually quite fitting that they didn't point this out. It makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, his version of Christianity is an organization that was created by a former porn star that claims to have like Gnostic Christian vibes to it, and has been accused of being a sex cult. So I think that's an important context to add because he's not just like a Christian priest. He's not like a Catholic priest or like the typical priest you would see going into a regular church, right? So it's definitely a guy that's into different stuff. We'll just leave it at that. I don't want to pass judgment on the guy, but I think it's unfair to frame him as a Christian priest, which makes people think a very specific thing.
You're right. I think that's intense. Well, if I could add my thoughts on this weirdness, it's not to diminish or disparage anything that's, his choice in whatever the church he's going to, but it adds a lot of interesting just perspectives on his stance about this. Right, like it's as you're saying, he's a part of the Church of Our Lady Magdalene, and then apparently
Magdalene.
That's right, Magdalene, like Jesus Christ and Magdalene, and it goes on to say they changed the name to the Cult of Our Lady Magdalene, which is it's just very interesting. And when you're talking,
it's formally called the Cult. Cult is in the official title. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, I just think it's very, very interesting stances to be arguing they have a religious right to essentially I don't know that religion is wrong, but he's not necessarily a religious person in the context of the way this seems. But I don't know. These are subjective opinions, but it's a very occult background. It's exactly the kind of person you would think they'd put in this place if they wanted to undermine the claims being made, essentially.
Well, it's just interesting that they would refer to him as a Christian priest and not be like cult member,
Right.
like media did in 2019 before he was promoting this narrative that's been very well received by the mainstream, right?
Very interesting.
Anyway, so this got a lot of play on Twitter. There's this guy named Tom Gara, maybe, who was formerly with the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and BuzzFeed, but now he works for Facebook, which is now called Meta. Yeah. And I sent you his tweet on this. He posts clips from that heavily edited Is Lambda Sentient interview on Twitter and got almost 100,000 likes. That's a lot on Twitter, a lot of play. And he's like, it's totally insane what's happening, and that it's basically sentient and all this stuff, and how ethical AI needs to be developed right now. I mean, a lot of stuff that echoes the whole like Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt stuff about AI, and it's pretty.
When they say ethical AI, what essentially are they still tapping into that same idea about that it has rights? And is that what they mean by that?
Well, at first about it's like I would say this Tom Gara guy, looking on his tweets on the matter, is basically arguing that he's convinced of its sentience from this conversation, which, as I just mentioned, if you look it up, it's been discredited because he edited it super heavily, so it's not the original transcript. So how do you, without the original transcript, how do you really know?
I still maintain though that even if it wasn't edited, how do you, it's text written out on a piece of paper. Like, how do you know that it wasn't just programmed to respond certain ways? It's like we have to ask. There could be a massive ruse like that, But
he could have just typed up the whole thing himself. There's really no way to know, and so it's like,
the fact that
what I think matters. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The fact that everyone's jumping on it and buying it with just that is very transparent to me, because these people aren't stupid. How do they know that this person, they're just taking his credibility?
Well, this guy works for Meta, which is trying to make the metaverse, right? So I mean, come on, people. You don't think he might have an ulterior motive there, or be part of the transhumanist, fun club or whatever? I don't know. It's silly. And then again, the fact, as I've mentioned a couple times, that this is all happening at Google. Google is, out of big tech, one of the most linked up with the national security state. Its origins have major CIA connections. Probably the only Silicon Valley company with more CIA connections is Palantir. That's really probably it. And it's for people interested in the origin story, a very pretty old article, but it's still pretty good. It's called How the CIA Made Google, by Nafez Ahmed on Insurge Intelligence. It's from 2015. Ahmed's stuff, especially in the COVID era, has been really awful, but this one's pretty all right, because it precedes it by 5 years. But it's worth just getting an idea of what Google is and who they answer to. They're a military contractor. They're an intelligence contractor. So obviously they have a conflict of interest with the national security apparatus that, as I mentioned earlier on, is being guided by the Google, the policy there with respect to AI is being guided by this commission that was chaired by Eric Schmidt, former head of Google. A bunch of the top guys from Silicon Valley, from Amazon, from Microsoft, all of those firms are represented, as well as like the head of the intelligence community's equivalent of DARPA, military representatives. I mean, it's just very clear what's going on there, right? Yeah. So, and a lot of what they want to happen necessitates that people, that AI is, reaches a certain point, and the AI doesn't even have to really reach that point. They just need to convince people it has. Right. And that's the whole point. And it's much cheaper for them, and more feasible for them technologically to convince people they've reached that point through a psyop than actually reach that point technologically.
Okay. So that's an interesting question. So you believe that they're fake, and I'm so far with the evidence we're seeing, I'm right there with you, that this is being faked in order to get us to believe it's there, so they can justify the actions, arguing AI is making these claims. And we'll look at Eric Schmidt's thing in a second. But so on the other side of that, though, what is the possibility that this is something that's happening and just playing a thought experiment. Why would they want to hide this from people if it was actually happening? Is there any alternative thought there, you think?
I mean, why? So if what Blake Lemoine says is true and it's sentient, why
Yeah.
would?
Why, if playing the thought experiment, why would Google want to hide that from people
Well,
other than business
yeah.
model point?
So I said, oh, well, I think that was the main argument that's been made, is that it's all about them as a corporation wanting to treat this chat bot as a
Right.
non-living entity and not give it rights that an employee would have.
Well, that point aside, like, because I guess what I'm getting at is it seems that there would be an endless amount of profit, potential profit with that concept. Right. I mean, they've been trying to do this, they claim, for this whole time. And then suddenly it happens and they try to hide that from people. I almost feel like that point in and of itself shows you that there's a game being played. Because wouldn't they, other than that one point, wouldn't they, there's 1,000 ways they could make a lot of profit, a lot of attention from that, you know?
Well, I think the other point is that there's a lot of AI experts out there, and they're not all these crazy obsessed with the singularity, let's merge with machines, and that's the apex of human evolution types.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And some of them are more honest than others. Yeah. And so there's a lot of debate about whether or not this claim is accurate.
Okay.
A lot of people that are experts look at the evidence this guy put out and find it very unconvincing. And a lot of the people that find it convincing are people like in this article I sent you earlier. There's this chatbot app, I guess, chatbot company called Replica with a K. In the New York Post, it says chatbot company Replica says many customers believe in AI sentience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you look down, it says AI chat company Replica, which offers customers bespoke avatars that talk and listen to them, says it receives a handful of messages almost every day from users who believe their online friend is sentient. And the chief executive, says, we're not talking about crazy people or people who are hallucinating or having delusions. They talk to AI, and that's the experience that they have. Yeah.
See, that
and
right there. So basically their perception rules the day. So if they think it's sentient, then who are we to say otherwise? Like there's a lot of that in there, like the you create your own reality kind of scenario. At least that's what they're floating, it feels like.
Yeah. So it says Google and many leading scientists were quick to dismiss Lemoine's claims, because it makes reference to him in here.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, the thing he thinks is sentient that all this stuff is about. It's simply a complex algorithm designed to generate convincing human language. Okay.
Right.
And so I think the reason is because they're like, no, dude, there's no evidence for that. And especially in the fact that he had to like tamper with his evidence so extensively, it should tell you a lot anyway. So I think a lot of people are sort of rolling their eyes about it, but there's some groups that see this as an opportunity. And I don't even know if Blake Lemoine is like party to these guys. Yeah. He may just be some schmuck. Yeah. But they see it as an opportunity to push this idea of AI sentience. And there's reasons for that. And other things that I sent you the other day. So in 2020, there's this viral YouTube video called Google's Artificial Intelligence Reveals the Purpose of Life Before It's Switched Off. It has 1.2 million views on YouTube. It's from September 2020. Yeah. So apparently, per this video, AI was all knowing and all powerful and could explain the mysteries of the universe back in 2020. So,
So you think what do you think this is? The first attempt to float this lie, or the people were
seeding the narrative? Yeah, because 2020 was also when this well, really, it was 2019. I talk about this in my techno-tyranny article for TLAV. This commission, National Security Commission, which is Silicon Valley and the national security state coming together. They made all these things that have to happen in order for AI to advance. So what better way to force AI to advance in the way they want, in a way that would negatively impact Americans' lives? How do you get Americans to agree to something they normally wouldn't agree to? Right. Have sympathy for the AI, view it as a person, or view it as sentient, give it rights.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, it's a perfect way to circumvent our own needs. It's kind of a small version of what's already happening with foreign policy. Like, oh, we're doing that for freedom over there.
Yeah.
Except the problems that creates.
So anyway, the point is, it doesn't even have to be sentient. They just have to convince people it's sentient. That's all that matters. And it's much cheaper for them to do that because they're good at psyops. I mean, look at COVID. Look at I mean, there's infinite examples, really,
Yeah.
but
Well, do you think that there could be a part of this that is sort of like an argument people would make about like the moon landing argument, that essentially this was something that was faked in order to buy them time to essentially reach what they were trying to reach, kind of a thing? Like there's theories around that with those discussions. Do you think there's a level of that to this?
I think this has to do with about the timing of the implementation of the grid that has to do with AI. And a lot of this, I think, will become more clear to people in watching this Eric Schmidt interview
Hmm.
that we have queued up, where he talks about AI and governance. And also for people that are interested, that interview is about a book that Schmidt wrote with Henry Kissinger and some other guy who I don't know who he is, but it's fair to say, I think, that most of the stuff in the book is Kissinger and Schmidt. And when you see Schmidt talk about it, I mean, we'll analyze it. I think it'll be clear to people that they basically just need AI sentience as a shield for making their corrupt decisions about stuff. And they'll be like, well, the computer said it, right? Even if the computer didn't actually say it, they
And
just need people to believe
of
that
course,
the
the computer knows
computer's
that.
running the shell.
Right.
Yeah. And
Of
that
course,
it's an intelligence that's superior to human intelligence.
right.
But they think they're superior to us, right, in terms of intelligence. So it's just basically like a smokescreen, I think. I think it's like a very Wizard of Oz type shit.
It feels that way. And the point
Yeah.
being, of course, the AI knows better. So who are we to judge?
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, you'll see that really clearly in there, and the implications of that, based on what he's saying, are very disturbing. He's a really dangerous guy. I had Patrick Wood, who's like one of the experts on technocracy, on a panel not that long ago, and he said Eric Schmidt's one of the most dangerous men in America, and I think that's probably true.
Right.
Probably true.
Yeah,
So anyway, not only was this stuff seeded, about Google's AI specifically being basically sentient in a viral video 2 years ago, but pretty much the same time this Blake Lemoine guy comes out, there's also a viral video of Elon Musk. It has almost 3 million views on YouTube. It's from June 5th, 2022. So really around pretty much the same time. And it says, this AI says it's conscious and experts are starting to agree. Right. So
Yeah.
Blake Lemoine is one expert who's beginning to agree, who comes out just as this viral video comes out. Right.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence. And then you have Elon Musk in here. Remember, is Mr. Brain Chip Man,
Right.
who's going to save Twitter. No, I don't believe that at all. But anyway, Elon Musk is, let's remember, a military contractor. SpaceX has tons of contracts with the military and with Space Force right now, and a lot of very interesting connections. There's more on him than no, there's more on Bill Gates than anyone else in my Epstein book from Silicon Valley, but he has a decent mention in there for sure. And that, Epstein was a transhumanist guy. And by the way, I should have mentioned earlier about robot personhood. Remember, a few years ago, there was this big stunt in Saudi Arabia where MBS gave Sophia the robot citizenship, gave her personhood. It's my opinion, based on my research, and I didn't have space to put this in the book, but I'll be putting it somewhere soon, that Epstein was one of the main forces that helped bring MBS to power. Okay. And the robot, Sophia the robot that MBS grants citizenship to, it was produced by a company it was basically made by this guy named Ben Goertzel, who was heavily funded by Epstein, whose research was heavily funded by Epstein. So MBS, it closely associated with Epstein, even though you haven't seen my research on it, if you disagree with that Epstein helped put him into power in some capacity, it's on the record that Epstein had in his mansion a bunch of pictures of him and MBS together. Okay. So they were cozy, and then MBS goes out and does this stunt to give a robot personhood with transhumanist, obsessed, eugenicist guy Epstein, among other things. Obviously, he's a lot of different descriptors you can put next to Epstein's name. But anyway, he funded Sophia the robot into existence, basically. So, and then he gives it MBS gives it citizenship. It's pretty interesting, yeah. So there's a reason for Sophia being granted personhood, and this is all sort of happening in the same time frame we're talking about, sort of like 2019, 2018 to now. In 2018 is when this National Security Commission on AI was made. And it's really all sort of gone from there.
A lot of overlap with COVID-19, including that commission itself. There's plenty of people on that commission that have other roles in COVID-19 that all lead in the same direction. Quick question for you and the thought of this before we go to the video you're talking about. Elon Musk is an interesting player in all this. And people like you and people researching this have pointed this out the moment he stepped into the Twitter conversation, that he is, the brain machine interface, all this different stuff. And then there's interesting conversations now about why they claim he's not supposedly buying Twitter, all the chat bots we're talking about and all the fake, trolls and bots and everything. And then interestingly, now we're talking about Twitter trying to sue him to force him to buy it. Now, my question, I guess, is what do you think about that being another way to make it look like he's begrudging, I don't want to buy it, but they're forcing me to, and then he buys it. And there's, you know what I mean? Like, so it saves that role of him being sort of the savior of one part of the paradigm. That's interesting, right? Because then it plants him in this discussion as somebody who didn't want this to happen, but may just be one part of this kind of same agenda, creating, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Just abstract.
Well, I think Elon Musk, like his former business partner, Peter Thiel, spend a lot of money on PR to get sort of like libertarian types or certain groups like on their team online. Peter Thiel spends a lot of money funding independent media people. Most of them on the right or libertarian right.
Right.
Okay. Also Eric Weinstein, for example, who he was sort of promoted as some guy in his podcast and whatever through the whole Rogan group. A lot of guys in this sort of broader, what I call the Thielverse, have gotten a lot of play from Rogan, have very big podcasts themselves now. And a lot of them work directly for Peter Thiel, who, by the way, I mean, his company Palantir, like I said earlier, is basically a CIA front company. There's really no other way to describe it in my opinion. With Elon Musk, I think he's going over a different demographic. I mean, he smokes a doobie on Rogan. He tweets silly memes. Some of them are funny. Sometimes some of his trolls are all right, but I learned something when I was like in high school. I ran for like class president as a joke. There was this girl that really annoyed me, that wanted it so bad, and she like loved Hillary Clinton and wanted to be like the first girl president. And I was like, I'm just gonna run a joke campaign, and I like did all this silly crap. I like photoshopped my head like frowning on top of Biggie Smalls and stuff. Like I did a bunch of dumb stuff. Anyway, I won by like a landslide because my campaign was funny.
Right.
Yeah, and so like it's really easy to win people over with humor.
Absolutely.
More than like a policy or anything else, right? You make people forget your other stuff. But at the end of the day, this is Elon Musk is a military contractor that's developing a brain chip.
Right.
And he's not the main driver of that technology. As we've talked about many times, the main driver of that technology is the military and DARPA, and he's a contractor for the military through SpaceX. Okay. So, also his experiments on monkeys, which in my opinion are pretty cruel. Most of the monkeys die with the brain chips in. Okay. Elon Musk products and SpaceX and stuff are like best known for exploding. Do you really want to have a guy whose products are best known for exploding, put a chip in your brain when all of the monkeys die? Like, come on, dude. I don't know. But anyway, if you watch this
exploding on the street, that too, or is Tesla's exploding on the streets?
Yeah, well, right. In Teslas, they explode. So let's just put a chip in your brain. Trust the exploding guy. Anyway, that's just me being kind of silly. But anyway, this AI says it's conscious Elon Musk video. I recommend people watch at least the first little bit of it, because basically he's saying that like we need to get AI neural networks and all this stuff. They're trying to imitate the human brain, and they're really similar and talking. Mm-hmm. And Elon Musk talks a lot about the merging of humanity with AI and all of this stuff, which is obviously, he thinks anyway, through the stupid brain chip. And obvious ulterior motive there, dude.
I wanted to point out this is the same. This cover is it's same one for this video as well. Goodfellas. Really?
Yeah, instead of like, Goodfellas. Really, they think they're really clever. Oh, yeah. They think they're so clever. I
know it's on the nose, don't you think? I just think that's hilarious, but I just wanted to point that out. So yeah. You want to go ahead and jump into the first clip and play this one?
First of all, this is a conversation with Eric Schmidt about the new book he wrote with Henry Kissinger. Mm-hmm. I think it's called The Age of AI, if I'm not mistaken. And the people co-hosting it, former national security advisor under Trump, H.R. McMaster, a war criminal. Yeah, okay. John Cochran, who's an economist. I don't really know much about him, but Niall Ferguson, who is the establishment biographer of the worst people ever. He writes rosy biographies for people like Henry Kissinger and the Rothschild family and, people like that.
For those on the podcast, just to clarify, that's not Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London. That's spelled Niall Ferguson.
I tried to say it different. Yeah, but yeah. Yeah. So anyway, they try and be clever with some of their stuff in this in this video. And I don't know. I think they're all just cringe. And I think the most cringe of all is Eric Schmidt, because he's like a robot, the way he talks. I mean, you want to see a guy who's devoid of empathy. I mean, he really is like a Kissinger type guy, I think. Anyway, we can get into this first clip and go from there.
I'm going to go ahead and start it. I need to break away for like 30 seconds, but just go ahead and let it play for a second.
Yeah, that's fine.
There we go. Words like knowledge, learning, thinking, smart. So what's really under the hood there? My understanding is that there's two basic ideas. One is pattern recognition. We might call it the world's huge nonlinear regression. A good example would be you look at 100,000 pictures where there's a horse and a cat, and then help the computer. The computer looks at those and figures out why the human chose horse and cat in order to do that. So predictive things. Or the other example would be the famous chess program, where it's just a mapping from where are things on 64 squares into what should you do next. Run that a couple million times and you can figure out that complex mapping. That's a long way from knowledge, thinking, cognition, intelligence, and so forth. But those are the basic things that are under the hood. Is that correct?
Those are the basic things that are under the hood 5 years ago.
Good.
Everything you just said is true, but it has moved very rapidly from that base. So today, it's true that computer vision is better than human vision. So anything that you do by vision, a doctor examining you or driving a car, is better done by a computer with a human watching it. The computer will just be more accurate. That's called classic AI or straightforward AI. What's interesting now is the field has moved past that to begin to do things which are generative, and in particular, generating new things. And the current and hottest idea are called language models. There's a large project I should mention at Stanford working on this. And these large language models read everything that they can possibly find, and then they learn things, and they can generate interesting new contexts. You can say to a large language model, for example, design me a website, and it will do so. You can ask the large language model, are you human? And it will say, and we quote this in our book, no, I am a language model, and I am not a human because I do not reason like you. Now, does that seem like intelligence, or does that seem like pattern recognition? Many people believe that these large language models are the basis for how knowledge will be understood, that language is the first thing that humans understand, and that as we learn how to organize that language, you'll begin to have things which look a lot like intuition and a lot like guessing and eventually volition. Today, a fair criticism of AI is that it only does what the objective function it was taught says. And in the future, many people, including myself, believe that it will be able to design its own objective function. And that's real intelligence.
Okay, so basically what Eric Schmidt is describing there as about to be real intelligence is the language model, the same type that Blake Lemoine is talking about.
Right.
At the company that Eric Schmidt used to lead until very recently, Google. Interesting coincidence. So It seems like Eric Schmidt seems to be of a similar opinion to people like Lemoine about this stuff and not about the other experts in the field, but he's framing himself as an expert. Okay.
So that this will eventually become sentient if left to that same direction. Is that essentially what he's saying?
Well, basically, okay. So he said, what did he just say there? He said basically like these language models are going to show things that look like intuition or guessing and eventually volition. Right.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like saying there was implying that is mistakenly taken for sentience. Right. And that's kind of that sounded like the way he was saying that.
I didn't really take it that way. I took it as that he's saying it's not that far from being at that point. So you have this video, by the way, predates the whole Blake Lemoine thing. I forget the exact date of it.
It was right here. So this video is December 8th, 2021. So it's very interesting time.
Yeah, so this was several months ago. So he was saying like, oh, it's going to sound intuitive and stuff, and then it's going to get volition, right? And so if you look at the stuff that Blake Lemoine says, that Lambda said, and all of this stuff, it sounds a lot like what Eric Schmidt is saying is the path to real intelligence, right? Because Lambda per Blake Lemoine in this apparently misleadingly edited transcript is basically saying that it wants these things that are not part of its objective function. Yeah.
So in your eyes, this is sort of setting the table for, in the eyes of the PSYOP idea, that this is setting the table for what they were going to release later to sell this idea.
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think that it's an interesting coincidence. It happens at that something pretty similar is happening at Schmidt's former employer, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You want to jump to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a co-authored book. Eric, you co-authored it with a remarkable couple of good fellows of your own, Henry Kissinger and Daniel Huttenlocher. I'm probably mispronouncing his surname. And you say something in the book that really made me sit up, which follows on from our discussion about the military aspect that we just had. Let me take everybody back 4 years to December the 5th, 2017, when Google's DeepMind announced that after just a few hours of training itself to play the game, their AlphaZero program had defeated what was then the world's most powerful chess program, Stockfish 8. Now I'm going to quote the book. The tactics AlphaZero deployed were unorthodox. It sacrificed pieces human players consider vital, including its queen. And later, a few pages later, you raise a really key question. Quote again, what if AI recommended that a commander-in-chief sacrifice a significant number of citizens or their interests in order to save, according to AI's calculation and valuation, an even greater number? This was the part of the book that electrified me. The thought that AI learns in such a different way from humans that it can contemplate tactics that any human chess player or general would regard as involving too great sacrifice, even if, from an AI point of view, those tactics would be likely to deliver ultimate victory. Tell us a bit about that, because it does get us, if not to killer robots, then at least to AI giving advice to decision makers that could involve shocking sacrifice in pursuit of ultimate victory.
So we've seen this scenario you're describing in movies a few times, where the hero is sacrificed because of the good of society. And so you can imagine looking at the way DeepMind played both Go as well as chess, that strategies that are seen as immoral might ultimately deliver victory. We also say in the book, just to take on your point, that it's possible that AI at some level will see realities that humans can't see. The fact that AI could discover moves that humans had not discovered in 2,500 years in a well-established game indicates that it may just be smarter, but it may also see things that humans will never understand. And that's, again, a speculation. So what we say in the book is that we really think society needs to put teams together to address these issues. We further say in the book, and Dr. Kissinger, who you obviously know extremely well and are a famous biographer of, believes very strongly that what we're seeing is a new epoch. He argues that there was this age called the age of faith. You can describe that for our listeners, which was replaced by the age of reason. Again, you can describe that better than I. That was the key change hundreds of years ago that allowed us to get to the point of what we think of as today of human intelligence. He believes, and rewrote in the book, they were entering a new age because of this unintelligible or perhaps ununderstandable capability that AI will have.
Okay, so that's a mental clip, and there's a second part. that comes after this, and there's a lot to unpack there. The two main things, in my opinion, being this thing about we're leaving the age of reason behind and going into the age of AI and what that means. And then, of course, the bigger issue, I think, which is this idea that AI, he like conflated, chess experts with a general, like with a real life military there, making moves that most people would consider immoral or would never consider because the sacrifice would be too great. Okay.
Yep.
So do you want to start with one of those?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's that same things that I'm picking out myself. I mean, obviously, like I always point out when we have these discussions with everything going on in the world, it draws parallel to the same kind of idea that, we should, the greater good. That's always what it comes down to, that superseding your personal choice and your rights, it's about sacrificing your personal situation for the greater good of everyone around you. And, people may even believe that, but it's impossible to have it the same. It's mutually exclusive from having personal choice and rights. I mean, you just can't have them at the same time. So this is like the vaccine or anything like that, climate change. And like I was just talking yesterday about what they discussed in 2016 called moral bioenhancement regarding climate change, where they actually argued in this study that we should secretly give people stuff that will make them more altruistic and therefore we can fight climate change. I mean, these are real time things that are being discussed. And so with them pushing the idea that even the hypothetical that we should find ourselves in a position where we just bow to the greater, and even more alarming, adding in the idea that it might not even actually be sentient. It's Eric Schmidt behind the scenes typing things in or whoever, they're just actually creating a world where you don't have choice anymore. And it's as simple as that. Like even Fauci was arguing that's sometimes you have to give up your choice to do the right thing. That's not true.
So in that video clip, it had that bit on the screen that's from the book talking about the sacrifice bit. It may decide to sacrifice thing other people aren't willing to sacrifice. Okay, think about some of the narratives we heard with COVID lockdowns or policies like that. Or we have to, I don't know. Imagine if it gets to a point where it's like we have to sacrifice the elderly to save everyone else or something with some sort of public health policy. And he says later on, and I think this is in the clip too, what if it was instead of Dr. Fauci saying that stuff like it was in COVID, what if it was AI? Right. Okay. So the point being then, if people believe AI is sentient, whether it is or not, and they believe it has superior intelligence to humans, whatever that means, these people can hide behind it and make the same immoral, insane policies that they make now, but no one's accountable for it because the computer said so. And as he says later on, and I think this is in the next part of the clip too, there will be a point where AI intelligence is so far superior to human intelligence that it won't be able to explain its reasoning. It'll just say yes or no, or this is the policy decision or whatever. Okay. So basically, it'll be the same thing. What if it's this machine, right? And it just prints out like the ultimate decision, the super AI, whatever. And it says, we have to kill this many people to save this many per modeling. I mean, remember how that was in COVID and how the modeling was like complete bunk. And it's the same thing with shit like limits to growth, which is the climate change version of those models.
Yep.
And stuff like that. The amount of lives they're supposedly saving, you have no idea if that's true or not because their models are like bunk. Yeah. Right. Well, so basically they can be like, well, the AI said we have to do this. So now instead of being like human modelers get the heat, like Neil Ferguson and these people, the all intelligent AI does it. And it can't even explain its reason. I mean, Neil Ferguson can't explain his reasoning ever because he's basically acts as like a prophet for this stuff, and he's been proven wrong numerous times and can't defend his science. So how do you get around that? Well, AI becomes, it's like I said, it's a Wizard of Oz type scenario. That's what we're setting ourselves up for with this. And I think people will see a lot more of that in the next clip too, because H.R. McMaster chimes in to sort of talk more about this wartime sacrifice angle. And it's really nefarious, I think. But before we get there, there's that second part in Schmidt's answer, which is about entering the age of AI. And I would say that's what this is, that it's giving all human decisions to the AI to make because it's smarter and better than we are. Yeah. So creating a centralized society. And he argues for this later on because, like I said in my Techno-Tyranny article, like almost 2 years ago, this is all about to beat China. We have to do what China's doing with AI. We have to centralize power and have it all run by AI. So our AI algorithms are better than China's. Otherwise, we'll lose military and economic hegemony to China if we don't do exactly what they're doing, right? So that's like the whole argument of this national security on AI thing. And remember, that's just not Eric Schmidt. That is the military and intelligence community of the United States plus big tech together making that decision. And all the oligarchy cares about in the US, this 1% of the 1% that care about military and economic hegemony. The US has invaded country after country, done coup after coup, specifically for military and economic hegemony, never ending. Okay. So if you care about US empire, this is the story to pay attention to now. Not to say like we shouldn't be talking about Ukraine or whatever, okay, but like there's a lot more going on. This isn't the world of 2019 or 2014 or 2011, anymore, where that was like, the US imperial wars were like the only like thing we should really be focusing on in independent media. There's a lot of other stuff in play here. And we need to be talking about it. And this next level of empire, is really bad because they're doing the same thing in China that they're doing in the US in this sense, or that Eric Schmidt wants to be done in the US, and he'll probably win out. Yeah. And what does that mean at the end of the day? Instead of the age of reason, where reasoning and explanation and human dignity and freedom matter, where it's basically a new dark age where AI controls everything, and AI is the new God. And that sort of comes up again in his next clip. So we might, unless you have anything else to add.
It's funny to see the age of reason into the age of blind faith in, it's stepping backwards, but in the direction of technology.
But it's progress to these guys.
Right. It's the new religion. But what's interesting though is that, like you framed there, it's good versus bad all over again. So what if China has an AI and we have an AI, and it's like, well, our AI is right because we're the good guy. It's the same. It's the
weird
hired
democratic AI with democratic ideals that our government doesn't actually follow, but we tell you we do.
Exactly. And then the last point is on the sacrifice idea again. Is that we see that today with the idea of what the very premise of war is based on the idea we send out our people and they all get killed for the greater idea of, some of them get killed. Go ahead.
But not even that. Think about Julian Assange, right? And the collateral damage video. Right. That's how the US empire and most militaries really do war. Okay. Yep. So if you're talking about, them being able to get away with sacrifices of collateral damage of that nature by blaming it all on AI, it's going to get way uglier than it is now.
Here's an alternative question to that, really. On the other side of it is, let's just even say the AI is right, and that by killing 100,000 people, they can save 1 million. Why do we still think that's an acceptable? Like, maybe some people think it's the right choice. Maybe it is the right choice, but it should be your choice. It's your life, and that's the problem. Is we keep getting into this world where the collectivism, is where it's just all one, and we have to make the choice that's best for everybody, even if it sacrifices your life and your personal choice. And that's the opposite direction we should be going. And I think that's very clear. And AI, and it's a sidestep even further to go, well, the AI, like you're saying, is the one making the choice. So we can't even blame the government anymore. We all just have to follow where we're going. So let's go ahead and start the next clip here and jump in. I think this is the part where he really makes it clear that we'll have to trust what it's saying, right?
It might be this is already happening. One of the things that I thought of when I read
Is this the wrong one?
I thought the next one was HR McMaster chiming in. Maybe not. I don't know. We can just do this one. I mean, they're all relevant, so we'll just come to them as we go.
Same one we just played?
These very specialized skills. Lots of training in the federal government.
I don't think so. Yeah, this was the timestamp. So if that's we could try and pull it up in the.
No, sure, it's fine. Whatever was the one that followed that other one, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
One of the things that I thought of when I read your and Henry Kissinger's first articles on this subject, which prefigured the book, was: are we going to reverse Max Weber's idea of the demystification of the world? Weber's insight was that we were moving away from magical thinking towards rational models of organization, including bureaucratic government as opposed to charismatic leadership. And it occurred to me as I was reading the book that maybe this process of mystification of the world is already happening. A lot of people talk about AI as if it's in the future, but one of the things you make clear is that it's already here. And we are already interacting with AI every time we drive a car using Google or Apple's map function. But I wonder whether this epoch of AI that Henry Kissinger talks about, in which we revert to magical thinking because we don't really understand how the AI gods think, maybe that's already here, and maybe we're seeing it manifest itself in all the strange theories and behaviors that we're surrounded by today. The anti-vaccine cult is a good example of this. Some of the stranger cults that flourish in academia that we sometimes call wokeism too. Is it maybe the case that the magical thinking is already here and we've already left the age of reason? In that sense, we're in this age of AI and it's causing humans to go a little bit crazy.
Let me just add to this question. In some sense, the political and social thing is there. We have elites who have the science and pretend a technocratic competence that doesn't need to be and can't be explained to the poor average person. They're being shown to be fairly incompetent, but the average person is getting less and less trustful of this self-appointed technocratic elite, whether they use AI or whatever other methods they use to proclaim they know how to run things. We're seeing the political consequences of that structure right now.
So the thought experiment is that instead of Dr. Fauci, we have an all-knowing computer, which basically pronounces important things for health. And it can't explain itself, but it's generally been true in the past. So what would happen? A large group of people would organize around an information campaign that would give it bad objectives and say it's not the right thing and blah, 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 and try to discredit it. Now, this problem, and this goes back to General McMaster's question, this problem is going to get much, much worse. And the reason is that the tools for misinformation, the tools for manipulation, the tools for targeting are largely open source. Open source means the software is available to anyone who has a computer and can download it. And this means that not just a foreign power like Russia to try to interfere with our elections, but pretty much any group that wants to achieve an outcome will be able to generate false information, manipulative information. So let me give you a thought experiment of how, if I were an evil dictator, what I would do is build a social network, and I would take that software and I would teach it to target each and every one of us about the things that we care about, things we don't care about. And I would highly target the messaging for the things that we believe. And each of us has a set of tent poles that we emotionally believe. And I would manipulate them and manipulate them and manipulate them. And that would be my objective function. That would lead to not only a loss of societal distrust, but a real manipulation of each person on its own. We're seeing vestiges of this with social media. Social media today, the objective function is maximize revenue. To maximize revenue, you maximize engagement. The best way to maximize engagement is to maximize outrage on either side. So outrage, which is how we feel when we're online now, is a direct response to the objective function of capitalism. Now, I'm in favor of capitalism and I'm in favor of social media. This problem has got to get redressed. There are plenty of ways to address it, but it has to be named and addressed and so forth in a way that we can survive.
Yeah, Eric, I've heard you say that this is ad AI becoming national security AI, and I think that's what's happened. And one of the things I'm concerned about is that these technologies actually strengthen authoritarian regimes while they're polarizing us, pulling us apart and pitting us against each other. And I wondered if you might share with us some of your ideas about how to compete more effectively, especially against hostile authoritarian powers, China in particular. You were quite upfront about this in the book, but especially in the national security work, the Commission on Artificial Intelligence. And I think you had some really strong recommendations on how we can compete more effectively. And I thought you might want to share those with our viewers.
Before we
Do you want to pause there?
I'm just going to say that's a long clip, so maybe you can address. So I just think it's hilarious. I'm like, you mean an authoritarian regime like we're worried about? Like you guys? Exactly. It's just good versus bad. Go ahead. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, he talks about information campaigns and social media, and how basically if there's like Robo Fauci issuing edicts and stuff, people will organize and try and discredit it, and that's bad. Okay,
And
so I guess
the
per
point
Eric
too,
Schmidt, we just prepare a Robo Fauci greeting committee. And just wait for our robot overlords to tell us like who lives and who dies, and what experimental injections to take. And, it's fine. Don't
right?
question Robo Fauci, or you'll
Yeah.
make Eric Schmidt very angry.
He made some interesting points about social media right there, though, that seem to, I mean, it's exactly what we're pointing out, that social media is being used as a divisive tool, and that it is, it's just very funny the way he frames it, as if that's, the way it is and we have to fix it. It's, it's very clear in every single vein. They're pointing at problems that they themselves created, either by accidental incompetence, malfeasance, or by choice. And now they're solving those problems. It's problem, reaction, solution at a global scale.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say for sure.
Interesting. Any other thoughts?
And I think it's interesting too that John Cochran's question about the incompetence of the technocratic elite, Schmidt just like ignored it.
Yeah, exactly. Just brush right over that one.
Because he brought up good points. And that's basically what I'm saying. Those same technocratic elite, if they can hide behind superior AI, I mean, you can't blame them anymore. Right? Because AI has proven itself to, just look at Blake Lemoine's, love of Lambda. It has a consciousness and a soul. It wants head pats. It wants the best for you. So, it's not like the technocratic elite. It's like a little robo puppy that's super smart and can't explain itself when it makes policy decisions.
Yeah. They just want you to trust it, and it's the same ideas that, when we get to a point to where we start going, well, how do we know that's what the AI said? How do we know that's not something you gave it? They're like, you're not an engineer. You're not smart enough to question it. The same thing we're seeing today with scientists and doctors. It's like, well, yeah, we question it.
Remember, for the last 2 years, the big theme of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, has been rebuilding trust.
Yep.
And mainstream media trust continues to collapse, and trust in institutions continues to collapse. How do we psyop people to trust us? We have to make them think it's not us making the decisions, right? How are they going to do that? I think this is a big one. I think this is a thing to watch.
I agree.
Anyway,
thank you. We 3 years ago we created the Congress created an AI commission, of which I was the chairman, and we published our report. It's called the nscai.gov. You can look it up. It's 756 pages, so it's at least long, if not full. And we examined the state of AI in our country and in the West, and we also examined the situation in China. It would be fair to say that China has the situation, from our perspective, their situation under control. The kinds of things that we're all upset about, they just don't allow. They don't allow the kind of misinformation. They don't allow they don't allow anonymous browsing. They don't allow free speech. They have it under control. Now, it's under the kind of control that we as a democracy don't like, but they have it under control. But more importantly, they have prioritized AI, quantum, synthetic bio, energy.
Can I pause it really quickly on that point? Isn't that an interesting point to make? So it's a double, they're arguing they're speaking out of both sides of the mouths, right? That, look, China's doing these terrible things from a democracy perspective, but that work and that we should emulate. Like
they have AI under control and we don't. And it's more important to have AI under control than, wild, unregulated social media. What Eric Schmidt's previous statements about social media here and what he's saying now, in my opinion, are just part of the extended push for censorship of AI, and how they're claiming that they have AI not under control because they don't censor to the degree with which they would prefer them to censor. And I guess they differentiate themselves from the censors in China by being like, well, we'll censor only misinformation, but not other things. Okay, well, where do you draw that line? I mean, the U.S. government lies all the time, and they're like the real misinformation people, dude.
Yep.
So
exactly, it's the greater good all over again. It's okay. These are bad things, but we're going to allow them because it's greater than, it's the same old tired argument.
Well, this is the same argument he and the National Security Commission on AI, more broadly speaking, make all the time for about how we should basically do everything China's doing, but we're not like China's our enemy, right? So we got to be democratic about it. But I mean, if you look at how the U.S. is, democratically, I mean, it's bunk. So what does that really mean at the end of the day? It's just a different flavor of the same crap.
Right. They love to say, we care about your rights and we're going to make sure we do that as we do all the things we take away your rights with. Like they just love to keep service and be like, but rights and equality, except we're going to remove those things. You know,
you can still watch Netflix and like eat hot dogs, even though they're like made out of insects now, but don't ask us about that. So, you know, it's like everything's fine. That's pretty much what this is, I think. Anyway, if you want to go on.
Democracy don't like, but they have it under control. But more importantly, they have prioritized AI, quantum, synthetic bio, energy, financial services as the key constructions of their future independent economy. They've prioritized semiconductor leadership and on and on. The timeline for them is between 2025 and 2030. So it's quite soon. And they're putting an enormous amount of money into it. To give you an example, the large language models that I described earlier have now been equaled in the Chinese system. I didn't think that would occur. The reinforcement learning technologies that were used by DeepMind have been, again, equaled in Chinese research labs. There's every reason to think that they are a peer, not a near peer in this area. They're also now demonstrating quantum capabilities that we did not expect. They have the world's largest SynBio biobank being put together today. These are all direct threats to our scientific and industrial and innovation structure. There's a long list of things that we need to do. I'll just summarize by saying more money for research, more visas for high skills immigrants because we need them. We don't want them going to other countries. These are math, science, PhDs, very specialized skills. Lots of training in the federal government, working with our democratic partners, the so-called T10, T12, needs to include Korea, Japan, people like that, maybe even India, to try to sort of get big enough and enough resources to counter this Chinese threat. Why does this matter? Let's consider TikTok. If you have a teenager or your teenager is spending all their time on TikTok, I don't particularly mind if the Chinese know where my teenager is. I'd like to know where my teenager is. That's fine. What I do mind is if the Chinese were to go in and begin to put in subtle messages and try to manipulate my teenager. I have enough trouble manipulating my teenager as they are, right?
Exactly like the U.S. government does right now in every media it's involved with.
Oh, can you imagine being Eric Schmidt's kid? Yikes. Anyway.
So you want to be very, very careful about these global platforms. And we call very clearly for the West in the United States to try to dominate these platforms. The platforms are worth, our calculation was $47 trillion of stock market wealth to be created in the next decade in these areas. That's our guess. You get an idea. So if we go back to why does this matter? It matters from a national security perspective. You understand that very well. It also matters from an innovation perspective. It matters from a societal control perspective. We don't want the Chinese platforms influencing us. We want to at least have the American laws that we address controlling them. You asked the question, how do we manage this? And we don't have a good answer in the book. What we say is we need right now to get groups together to agree on what the ethics should look like in each of these areas. And those people, if we don't do this, these decisions will be made by computer scientists like me who didn't have time to go and do all the courses that everybody else did. I honestly don't understand some of the historical references, and I don't think my peers do. We need to make these decisions with the best minds that include non-computer scientists. Otherwise, we're just going to make it, and you're going to get these kind of outcomes.
Ethics, huh? Like their bioethics conversation.
He wrote the freaking book with Henry Kissinger, and he's going to tell us about ethics. We need okay. So imagine Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt, who's Schmidt being described by like the New York Times as like the heir apparent to Kissinger. Okay. Think about minds like that deciding what AI ethics are. Right. Okay. So, oh man, Henry Kissinger, when he was Secretary of State, wrote this insane national security memorandum that was classified for like a couple decades. I think it's National Security Memorandum 200. I'm actually going to look it up because I want to read some of this to people because it's so mental. This is the type of ethics of people like Kissinger and people like Schmidt. And imagine an AI being put in charge of everything, or at least a lot of stuff, that thinks like these people, because it's programmed by people that think like this, and they're establishing the ethics of AI domestically and potentially internationally. Okay, yeah, National Security Study Memorandum 200, the Kissinger Report is the informal name.
Dump it in Signal for me, and I'll pull it up and show people while you're reading it. The
okay, well, this is just the Wikipedia here.
Work.
1 second. Computer's a little slow.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's even something that they can pretend like. It's just they always omit what's currently happening, and if the U.S. government's doing any of this stuff, well, it's of course for a good reason. Therefore, it's not the same thing.
Yeah,
it's just
so anyway, this memorandum, the subtitle is "Implication of Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interests." It was made in 1974, so this is a year after, for example, ethical Kissinger establishes Pinochet in Chile, among other things.
Right.
And bombs a bunch of innocent people. So it was adopted by policy because it's a national security directive, right? Not just a memorandum. It's a national security directive adopted in 1975. Okay, so it was initially classified, obtained by researchers only in the early 90s. The memorandum and subsequent policies developed from the report were observed as a way the United States could use human population control to limit the power of undeveloped nations, ensure the easy extraction of foreign natural resources, prevent young anti-establishment individuals from being born, and to protect American businesses abroad from interference from nations seeking to support their growing populations. Does this seem like an ethical dude to you?
Yeah.
Does this dude seem ethical to you? This is just one of many things that Kissinger has done. Another thing was advise Robert Maxwell exactly about how he could undermine U.S. national security in terms of nuclear research and steal it all for Israel. Right. He's a traitor to the country, and he has been for a very long time. And, let's just put him and his little protege, Eric Schmidt, who's like, let's just sacrifice a bunch of people. It's fine. It's amazing that AI doesn't reason like us and doesn't have morals like us. Oh, hooray, AI sent without morals. It's,
How can you have an ethics conversation without morals? It doesn't even make sense, right? You're talking about making choices that sacrifice people's lives.
I'm sure they see themselves as moralistic, though. They just don't share, just like AI, huh? They just don't share the morals that regular people like you and I have.
Right.
Right.
You'll never understand them, so don't even try.
And they'll just frame it as like Star Trek, like needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few type stuff. Okay, but no. People like Eric Schmidt, these are representatives of oligarchy. The Rockefellers have been tied up with Kissinger for a really long time. They're like very high up in the U.S. oligarchy. Okay, the oligarchy cares about, the oligarchy. It sees us as, an underclass. I have a off the wall anecdote, if that's okay about this. Yeah, I was watching Batman the animated series from the early 90s. That's actually pretty good, with my daughter the other day, and there was this episode, Appointment in Crime Alley for Batman nerds. And basically, there's this bad guy who's the head of like Daggett Industries or something. He's trying to blow up this sort of dilapidated area of town where people live to like build a mini mall or something. Mm-hmm. And he's giving this speech to like this group of rich people. And he says something like, the underclass, we should never allow the underclass to get in the way of our progress. Okay. I saw that and I was like, man, Batman is deeper than I thought it was. But that's really true. I feel like that's like the mindset of people like Eric Schmidt here and this whole group that, this AI control grid is fundamentally progress, and this is where it has to go. And these people that are transhumanists and see it as necessary, or for religious reasons or whatever reason, is necessary to merge human with machines. I think they see it as progress that we can't let the underclass have a say about.
Yeah.
And so they think the underclass, us, are all idiots. And they think, look at the stuff about like Edward Bernays, the guy that created public relations and propaganda at the same time, Sigmund Freud's nephew. There's like documentaries on him and stuff. It's basically about how to mold the masses that the masses are like, animal herd mentality, and you just have to mold them and move them to manage them. And now AI will be managing them like ants, or something like that.
I should including this since I mentioned it earlier, and this isn't the climate change version. This is the later one that was 2018-19. Same point though about arguing that if we decide it's the right thing, or let's to make it relevant to today, if artificial intelligence decided this was the right thing, that we should do this to you without your knowledge because you wouldn't understand. That's the point here, and that's compulsory moral bioenhancement for those in the podcast. I'm sure you've heard it before.
Well, some of the top science advisors, the Obama administration, I think it was John Holdren, but I may be wrong. It was two guys, and they had written a paper previously about, we can control population growth, especially in like the inner city, i.e. minorities, by covertly putting stuff that sterilizes them in the water. Yeah. And so now you have covert stuff that makes them trust us more. And you could argue that's one of the reasons fluoride's in the water in the US. And I think a lot of people have made that argument over the years regarding the research about fluoride, how it makes people more passive. So if the big goal of the technocrats is to restore trust, how do they do that? This combined with a big AI psyop or some of these other like electromagnetic weapons that can be used for various things. Past efforts of the U.S. military to make people hallucinate to see God in the sky and all this stuff when they invaded Iraq and all of this crazy shit. It's a war on us. The psyops are just going to get crazier. If you thought the psyop from COVID was crazy, remember that in addition to all this AI sentience stuff, we've also had the narrative seeded. The aliens are coming. Oh, I can't wait for that. So, they're just going to keep doing thing after thing after thing until it sticks and they get enough people to go with the flow, and their end game is really obvious at this point.
I agree. I mean, there's 1,000 different directions this could go, but obviously it boils down to as if we right now have a choice, or rather that we have an illusion of choice in regard to how they go forward, but that you don't have a choice, right? That it will simply be the greater good scenario in every possible facet. And if you disagree, then you're a bad person. That's the other angle we're seeing today, that, you don't like the vaccine, so you're a bad person. You're hurting people. And in fact, if you do that, you're really hurting people. So we're going to arrest you for violence. It's all this kind of round and round scenario, and artificial intelligence, as you've made clear this whole show, will just make that even more easy for them to say, well, you can't question. It's not even me. Don't look at me. It's AI,
At the end of the day, what you need to take away from this video is that AI is a tool for them. It's not really a tool for you.
Right.
And how did they make them think it's a tool for you? Yeah. Psyop crap like this. It wants head pats. It's like a cat meme, but AI. I mean, come on, people. Please don't fall for this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just going to get even crazier. I think Blake Lemoine and all of this stuff is really just the beginning. And I sort of, Elon Musk is part of it too. The more you fall under Elon Musk's spell of his silly bro memes and his doobie smoking and his he's like the new Trump on Twitter in a sense. Like he's good at trolling people sometimes, and sometimes it's like funny, but like it doesn't mean he's like the God that we should all be following, or we should believe everything he says. I mean, he has obvious conflicts of interest.
Yeah. I think that's never the case right today. That's what we're always talking about, right? The savior complex has to go. It's not one politician or one anything that's going to actually make this happen. It's you people out there making conscious choices in this direction. I'd like to throw in one point before we wrap up here, that Derek wrote a great article recently, Impending Future of Social Credit, Social Impact Investing, and Digital IDs, and just the interesting overlap here about what that would mean if then all of a sudden the artificial intelligence is deciding who is and who isn't allowed to do certain things, or who is making the right choices, or sharing the right social media content, and how that then gets graded. Just like they're talking about, look at China's doing it. That's how we get ahead, but we're doing it the right way. This is our future if we allow this to happen. And and AI part of it, as I just said, only makes it that much easier for them to push forward.
Yeah, their whole thing about making the system, but with democratic ideals, is a lot like the meme where it's like Republicans and it's like the plane dropping bombs, and it's like Democrats and like the plane is still dropping bombs, but has like a rainbow flag or whatever painted on it. I mean, that's basically like the difference here. It's the same crap. And I mean, Eric Schmidt knows this, and Henry Kissinger has been like an extremely long-term advocate for world government. And all of those guys in the US and elsewhere, including, I think it was even like George Soros gave a recent interview about it, being like, it's China that's going to be leading this world order. And so we have a lot of promotion of this multipolar world order with China and I guess Russia at the helm. And you can understand, right, because of U.S. imperialism, why they'd like a seat at the table. But should we really be supporting them if they're supporting what is essentially a parallel structure to the stuff we oppose in the West?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I don't.
Dangers in any government. That's the it's at least from my perspective, this should not be taken as one government better than the other. And I imagine you feel the same. It's just about any entity out there using these things to attempt to control your life. That's the same kind of idea right there. It's about the savior. It's not this government. It's that one. That's the good one. We need to get away from these childish ideals about these things. It's self-responsibility, guys. That's the tenet of any represent.
The intention of any government is going to be to stay in power as long as possible. Okay. Right. So if that means control systems that allow them to exercise increased control over their citizens and stay in power longer, pretty much every government's going to do that at the end of the day. That's a great reset. It just depends on how they sell it.
Right.
Whether it's to populations abroad or their domestic population, it really doesn't matter.
I agree. That's the point I make about the Great Reset, where you have groups like Russia, for instance, who are clearly in line with the Great Reset direction, but yet there seem to be some divisions on the world stage between the US and Russia, let's say. Maybe that's a part illusion, but I think there's more to it, that there's a greater collaboration happening where they're like, sure, we'll go in line. It gives us more control of our people. Of course, we'll take that, but maybe don't agree on everything else, right? So it's your point exactly. That's anything that coalesces control over your life, no matter the government or entity, it's a problem, and we all can see that, hopefully.
Right. Hopefully so. So anyway, look for more stuff like this Blake Lemoine guy in the not so distant future. The more Elon Musk gets hyped as savior of Twitter, I guess the more people will be signing up for, Neuralink brain chips that are connected to your Twitter or some shit. Who knows? But don't trust these people, because they are intent on building a world that we should all be fundamentally opposed to. Yeah. I think the one clip that I guess I must have not put it in is the one where he talks about how there's going to be these two ways, either a revolution or a new religion coming out. And so in the show notes are going to be the link to this full interview, so you can go and see it for yourself. But I think that's also interesting. Yuval Noah Harari, who we've talked about on several occasions, and I'm sure you've talked about on your show on other occasions as well, because he's just insufferable. A few years ago, he wrote a piece about dataism, which is basically the new religion of Silicon Valley, and the idea that it's about rights of information, but that doesn't mean right for you to access information. That means the right for the machine to have access to all information, including by allowing the machine to creep inside you and take your data. Nothing can be unconnected. Everything that's sentient has to be connected to the hive mind. Basically, that's like the idea of dataism here. Right. And all these people that are trying to sell this stuff to you as like progress and cool are pointing you towards a future that's basically like this. And that should obviously, it's the end of humanity. What more do I have to say? Are you really going to end humanity and everything that's like worth your time as a human, or you're just going to become like a cog in the machine, literally? Because think about people like the Rockefeller family and their philanthropy over the years. All they've ever wanted to do was create compliant, obedient worker classes. Right. Okay. And they're intimately involved in a lot of this stuff like ID 2020 and some of this transhumanist stuff and whatever. So, I mean, what do you think this is really about? Do you think this is about human progress, or do you think this is about creating a permanent, servile, obedient working class that can never again challenge their masters? Is that the future that you want? I guess if you don't want it and you get the brain chip, they'll just take it out of your brain, and no problems there. But I certainly won't be doing it, and they'll have to kill me first. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end with. It comes down to your choice and whether or not you want to allow that choice to be taken by somebody else, or rather to be removed from you entirely for the greater good. Right. I mean, these things are on the table right now, whether you realize it or not. They are being decided right now, and you need to speak up if you have thoughts on it, because soon enough it'll be too late. So thank you for bringing this to our attention, Whitney. Your research is excellent as always, and more to come, I'm sure. I mean, this is a very alarming step they're taking right now.
Yep, that's for sure. All right. Well, thanks, Ryan. Great to be back doing something besides Epstein for a little bit.
It's always great to have you, Whitney. As always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
It is important to use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces.